Hey, Steelers Nation, what a first half of that was. Getting everything that really we could want from that first half from the Steelers happening. Obviously, 3-and-out, looking great. The offense just moving the ball consistently. Kenny Pickett just on fire. And I think there's a lot of great things I want to break down and cover here. It was really a really good first half. First off, when we look at the way that the offense was run with Kenny, the number one thing that we've talked about that they need to do in the offseason, they did in that drive, which was have an average ball in the air per attempt over 10 yards. And that was consistent the entire drive with Kenny. In fact, the only pass he had was short of that was when we had to run out and kind of do the chuck down so he didn't get sacked. So when we look at what was going on there, moving the ball downfield, hitting receivers past the sticks was the key to that. The other overall impression from that first half was very limited penalties from when the actual relevant players were on the field. And I think that's another key thing as we saw stark contrast to what Tampa was doing out there. Failing to line up successfully is not acceptable. And to see that how far ahead the discipline of the Steelers was just really, really good out there. But again, don't press George Pickens. I think that's going to be one of the things that becomes very obvious when you look at this film and people are going to realize. You try pressing George Pickens, what happens? He gets open, Kenny's accurate, and great things are happening. So Steelers Nation, like I said, I just love how this started. Kenny's not afraid. The offense working in long third downs. And on defense, Quan Alexander, you could immediately tell when he was on the field and when he wasn't. That guy is making plays and blowing things up in an absolute fantastic way. I love the way that he's seeing the attacking and the aggression. I'm very much against the way that penalty was called because, as Pompiani said, how are you going to call that a penalty when he's lunging at the dude's waist? It's not his fault that the other guy's short. So I really don't like how that was a penalty at the end of the day. But Quan Alexander, to me, was the defensive player to look at and had an amazing jump at the beginning of that game. And this rookie that, to me, that stood out the most had some big flashes and some plays that got burnt, and that was Benton. Because when you look at that fourth down play that we stuffed, Benton is the one who actually pushes the entire pile back, and the rest of the defense comes around and absorbs the tackle. I just absolutely loved how that went. Benton is getting great pushes. Now, as we break down this film, and I will do it for you guys later in the week, we'll see that he has plays where he's getting his good, strong hands and whipping around and just not finishing through the rest of the play. And this is part of the adjustment from being 22 years old and now entering the NFL. But as a debut starting point, absolutely phenomenal what Benton was doing out there. Can't say enough about it. But yeah, there's some plays where he disappeared and got beat out. That's part of life. Have you guys watched the video yesterday of me doing my prediction of what would happen in today's game? There were two main things that I was worried about and looking for. The first was, will the interior defensive line with Ogunjobi and Cam not playing, will they be able to stand up against the run? And what we basically saw was inconsistency. There were times that Loudermilk was getting blown back and we were letting up 5-6 yard runs and basically getting bailed out by Tampa Bay's penalties and lack of basic things like being in a good formation. And then there were plays, like I just mentioned before, where Benton gets a crazy pushback and makes it work. And unfortunately, that's what you get in a first preseason game. But when we look at that overall, it's something to be really appreciative for in moving forward. The other thing that I called in yesterday's show, which I thought was going to be pretty obvious, Trubisky threw an interception. He's been doing it all camp long. If you listen to Charlie Batch, everyone's had the greatest camp ever. But, Trubisky hasn't. It's just a fact of life. And when we look at how it was going, the team is really in a great spot. The ball placement that Kenny put on all of his passes was right there. You didn't see any of people having to reach or dive down, and Tampa giving you a great opposite to compose that to shows it really black and white. With Baker out there, people are reaching and leaning back. Trask can't even hit wide open receivers. And it really pointed out how much Kenny is better than him. Granted, Tampa is probably the worst roster in the NFL, or at least bottom three. And when they don't play their actual starters, it's even worse. So there's a lot of to that, but it still shows how far Kenny has come and that Kenny is looking like he's going to grow and master this point. I love the fact that we're hitting Freiermuth early. I personally would give him the ball in the first play of every single game just to hear people yell Muth. I love that as a fan, and I love it when we do it in road stadiums. When we look at at everything that was going on in that first half, the first offensive line, basically no pressure, very good in terms of having time for Kenny, having a desire to push the ball downfield, and Kenny putting the ball where it needs to be. Like I said, in terms of what you could want from that starting offensive line, basically every single box was checked. I'm going to go through the tape to specifically look at Broderick on the second team stuff, but to me, the story is he started on the second team. Nothing obvious that he messed up like Kendrick Green, and I guess we need to spend a moment or two on that. Dude, that was rough. In a 4-play sequence there, he basically essentially lost the drive, and it might have lost his job as a team roster spot as a result of that. He was already in a hard spot on the outside looking in to make the team anyways, and to have a holding penalty, which maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but to miss a snap wide to the right, it just got really ugly really fast, and then not to mention get blown backwards into your quarterback and blown backwards for about 5 yards in the process nonetheless. That was a rough series of plays for Kendrick Green there, and we'll see if he recover. I highly doubt we see any of that fullback stuff ever in an actual stadium, but maybe that's the one thing that would at least give some positive buzz coming out of here. But I suspect that he's going to be the center of the rest of this game, if for no other reason you want to give him a chance to recover. You know, I liked what we saw pretty much across the board from this team. McFarland no longer dancing the way that he had been in the previous 2 years, taking holes and cutting them upfield was something I found very tremendous. Kendrick Green is not going to be a fullback for those people set out there. He's not an NFL player. I think that's the fundamental fact of what we listen here. He's not going to be the center for the simple fact that on the NFL roster the Steelers have right now, they have 4 center quality players. Both of the guards, Smallwood and Daniels, have played center before. Herbig, who we signed to be the starter before we signed Solomalo, has center experience. You're not going to need to dress 5 centers on any given day. And given how the roster is being constructed, if you want McFarland to get a hat on game day, you got to cut a corner somewhere else on offense. And it's going to be at 7 offensive linemen instead of 8, which means if you're never going to dress the 8th one, there's no point to have Kendrick Green on the team. And the reason he's not going to be the fullback is because Cam Hayward's better at it, for one. And if you want to have the size, have Washington out there. There's just not a spot for Kendrick Green on this roster when it's all said and done. And like I said, McFarland's going to be out there because they're building this up, and that's the way you can get him a roster spot. Because you're not going to take away on game day one of your receivers who you need on special teams. So therefore, that's why Green is most in problems to actually make this team at all. And it really comes down to the diversity of how you're going to build your roster with the 45-man lineup. So overall, I get it that he was a fullback. It was a nice little story. I think it's something that I got sucked into immediately, but it's not real. He's not going to be making a team. It was him giving a bailout thing. Maybe he could be like Picard in Baltimore and do it. But at the end of the day, we don't really use a fullback enough to warrant the position. What we do is have Connor Hayward, who can do all kinds of different stuff, including show really good hands. You know, going through last year, some of the highlights when I was doing the highlight shows earlier, Connor Hayward was remarkable. And for a 6th-round pick who should have no expectations, no game plan, no none of that, to deliver the way that he did last year is great. And to see Connor picking it up and growing, I think is a tremendous thing. When we look at the way that the Steelers have constructed this roster, it is absolutely phenomenal. And like I said, I am so glad with the depth that we had, because we've had years in the past where it was, if there's one chink in the armor, this thing's breaking. And we saw basically the first and second team not have problems with the offensive line. I remember during Ben that you barely had problems with the first offensive line, let alone the second D. And when we look at the depth at the receiving core, up and down that roster, there were wide open passes. And in contrast, I get Baker Mayfield can't throw the ball to save his life. Our defense wasn't allowing things. You even look at that touchdown that we let up in the back corner. Pierre is all over him for that coverage. This is a great measuring stick for how are the Steelers doing relative to another NFL team. Again, as I said before, Tampa's one of the worst rosters in the league, and they have a coach who's probably out of his depth. But the bottom line is the preparation and the combat that the Steelers brought into here compared to another team shows that not only are they above the line, they're actually showing that they're dominant. And the Steelers have not been truly dominant since Ben was like 29. And this is very exciting to see. Again, I get it. They're a bottom of the barrel team in Tampa. But there are plenty of times that we can remember going back to just last season, the Jets, New England, when we couldn't blow out teams that were mid to bottom of the barrel. And being in the spot where Kenny just went right down the field, zero problem, converting on third downs, and starting with the capacity of saying, hey, we're just going to throw it and make the best results. I really liked how it was downfield passing. This is a great debut for how the Steelers are going to be this season. And I think it's an absolute great situation. And as long as we just keep essentially that mojo going, it's going to be awesome. And imagine how good this secondary is going to look when our pass rushers dress. You know, we're not getting the kind of pressure on Baker, and he still was almost running into sacks. Baker Mayfield's just a horrible quarterback. It's just something right about watching the Steelers play Baker early. But halftime's about to end here, guys. I get that you're going to want to jump back and see the second half. I appreciate joining you guys for halftime. We'll be with you in a little bit. And here we go, Steelers. Here we go.